All right, great. So, hello, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, my name is Chrissy Wade. I'm an off-grid homesteader, farmer in Waterville, Vermont. My husband and I both became UVM certified master composters about 2 years ago. Some of you know my story and many of you don't, and perhaps you've read the news or heard the radio program connected to my story and the subsequent grassroots advocacy work. Maybe you're here because you already live off grid and you want to advocate for more freedom to live simply and responsibly, or perhaps your septic system has been taxed during COVID and you are interested in a backup system. Maybe you're curious about compost toilets or you have concerns about humanure composting. Please say hello in the chat and tell us why you're here today and what you hope to learn. Be sure, as Julia said, to mute yourself so everyone can hear. We will be recording the webinar and sharing it widely. Feel free to turn off your camera and submit questions either on the chat, and we will try to answer them at the end, or you could ask Julia or I directly in the chat. If you'd rather ask a question anonymously, and then we can try to address it either during the end at the Q&A or in a follow-up email for support. I just want to give a shout out to Julia at Rich Earth here, who we put this whole thing together really in less than a week. I know she'd been working on a webinar before, but our team pulled together for this, and I just want to thank her for that. So yeah, all right. So so we are the Vermont Eco Sanitation Working Group, and really the who we are has to do with why we are, right? So so it kind of started with me in a really brief, in a nutshell story. I'll tell you what happened and why I pulled this team of people together. Our family was threatened with fines and even eviction if we did not comply with Vermont state rules related to connecting piped in and out water for our off-grid yurt 5 years ago. We have a drilled well with a hand pump, a compost toilet, and did laundry off-site. We read Joseph Jenkins' classic How To, the Humanure Handbook, and composted all of our toilet contents exactly how he described. It was magical and it worked really well. We became devout and passionate humanure composters and even took samples to the lab for testing, which provided stellar results. After pushing back on state rules, and we found hope briefly working with the DEC, with the solid waste department, especially was really, we were working together towards alternatives. Then we found hope briefly, and then that got squashed pretty abruptly, and we were forced to take a loan we couldn't afford for an overkill septic and agreed to follow state rules, which currently has no humanure compost usable nutrient recovery path at this time. This extremely frustrating experience inspired me to pull together a working group with scientists and experts in the field of composting and compost toilet management. We are the informal yet dedicated Vermont Eco Sanitation Work Group. We've met monthly for the past 2 years to clarify regulatory barriers and opportunities for compost toilet solid management in Vermont by identifying partners, reviewing prior research, and developing best management practices. And this webinar explains our goals related to the current barriers and how to support our efforts or learn more. So protecting water resources, on this graph, you'll see like the majority, not surprisingly, is that flush toilets consume the majority of water of all household activities. Rather than wasting precious potable water, we can collect the waste with waterless toilets. And fun facts, most of you probably already know about household water usage. Toilet water contaminated with human feces and urine is called black water. Water from all other household appliances is called gray water. And I'm going to hand it over to Deb for the next slide.
Yeah, hi, I'm Deb Neher, and I'm a professor in plant and soil science at the University of Vermont, and my expertise is in soil ecology, and I've been conducting research on compost microbiology over the last 10 to 15 years. So I'm kind of a scientist on the group. So anyway, that's where I fit in here. So what we're talking about here is trying to, instead of thinking about flushing our material as waste and causing nutrient pollution, we want to be able to reclaim it as a resource by as compost for building the soil and supporting the local food systems. Next slide.
Oops, sorry, I was muted there. Thanks, Deb. I'm Julia Cavicchi. I'm the education director at the Rich Earth Institute. We're down in Brattleboro, Vermont, and we're kind of recycling urine as a fertilizer down there, and also working to support these kind of humanure composting practices statewide. So we see kind of composting toilets as part of kind of the climate resilient solution that we need in Vermont. And so in particular, Vermont's wastewater systems are contributing to climate change in a number of ways. We actually have the greatest kind of per capita proportion of septic systems in the whole country. About 55% of Vermonters are on septic. And this leads to a huge amount of septic sludge being pumped and hauled long distances, sometimes out of state, to landfills and incinerators. And the kind of greenhouse gas emission impact of that hauling is pretty huge. And then also wastewater treatment plants contribute to climate change as well, being kind of highly energy intensive processes. So we see compost toilets as a really low carbon alternative for on-site management and reuse. And I think another important connection between kind of on-site composting and building climate resilience is this Vermont goal for compact village settlement, so that more folks can live in village centers and not have to travel long distances to access resources, and also so that we can house more climate migrants. As we know, Vermont is going to increasingly become a climate recipient state. And a kind of key barrier in Vermont, and this is something that Secretary Julie Moore has recognized, is that wastewater infrastructure just doesn't physically have space to be implemented in village centers. And having kind of composting toilets and other on-site management options can be an affordable tool for allowing for this kind of smart growth to be possible in our state. And I'll pass it over back to Chrissy for this one.
Thanks, Julia. So it's a practice in need of a pathway. Residential compost toilets are very common and legal to have a compost toilet in Vermont. It's what's done with the contents of the compost toilet is where barriers and confusion exists. So currently there are many people already using compost toilets and managing the contents on their properties. Many are doing it with integrity, and while some might benefit from education and support, however, when folks start inquiring and realize they might get penalized in some way, they stop asking questions or looking for support, and the risk for mismanagement can be greater. Next slide. So the current allowable options, as you can see here, there are 3 of them. The first one is the landfill, and we all kind of know why that's not a great practice. You know, once in the landfill, human waste undergoes anaerobic decomposition, contributes to methane emissions. Most people who have a compost toilet, that's not why or what they want to do with the contents. And let's see, we've got the wastewater treatment plants. So, you know, you could bring it there, but they may or may not accept it. And there's shallow burial, and which requires a permit for burying the solids. And it is unclear how many permits have actually been filed, and it lacks clear guidance to protect human health and environmental health. And Deb's going to talk about that a little more in a moment in the next slide, but we're talking about compost toilets, and none of the pathways currently promote composting. There's a general misconception that compost toilets create usable compost in their chambers, when in reality, compost toilets will require further pathogen reduction through composting prior to using as a soil amendment. And I will pass it to Deb for the shallow burial.
Yeah, so as she mentioned, you can get a permit for shallow burial. What this does is allows the burial of the human waste on land that meets specifications of a septic leach field. just in generalities, we're talking about, about a 6-inch burial, making sure the soil is aerobic. So we've got plenty of oxygen and it's away from water tables, and whether that's surface or groundwater. The challenge is the permit can be expensive to procure and implement. And there is no guidance really for how to store and manage solids, which is an issue here in Vermont, especially during the winter. Which is a difficult time to be thinking about burial. And we've been hearing many homeowners reporting about this unclear pathway to obtain the permit, including some reluctance from wastewater engineers to pursue this permitting pathway.
So I'm going to talk about two kind of alternate pathways that exist in Vermont for composting human waste, sort of as kind of exemptions outside of these standard 3 things that are available to homeowners. So Rich Earth here in Brattleboro has recently acquired a new solid waste management plant permit. And this is a kind of permit that we've had for many years for our urine processing. And we recently added something that would allow us to be able to receive solids from local area residents compost toilets and bring it to our facility to compost. And also to be able to compost the solids from our little portable toilet business that we have. Acquiring this solid waste management permit was very expensive and time consuming for us. It took a little over a year to kind of complete the whole permitting process for this. And having this permit requires us to then do regular testing and reporting to the state on our on-site composting. And in order to do this, we'll need to develop sort of a commercial composting facility on site to be able to receive these solids and kind of have this service available to folks in our community. So currently we do not have that composting process set up yet. And we're still bringing our solids over to a wastewater treatment plant in New Hampshire. But we have hopes that we can set this up. So it's kind of an option in terms of how Vermonters could compost their waste, of having facilities like us in various places in the state and receiving solids from local people's toilets. But it's very complicated and expensive to set up and probably not sort of a feasible option in terms of how we want to manage everyone's composting toilets in our state. But that's kind of the journey that we've been on. So another exemption in the state is the Vermont State Parks with their moldering toilets. So early on in our working group, we were connected with the Vermont State Parks because they have all of these moldering toilets across the state and not a clear management pathway for their solids. And so we worked to connect them with Deb Neher and kind of the science behind what options might be possible for managing their solids, and also connecting them with the regulators to figure out what a good pathway forwards might be. And as a result of that work, they've developed an exemption with best management practices for their backcountry moldering toilets. And that kind of demonstrates a pathway for how toilet solids might be managed, and kind of the important work of connecting these different groups together that we're hoping we can continue to do more of. And with that, I'll pass it back to Deb for this one.
The process of composting can be a safe and effective way to help return organic matter and nutrients to the soil. This close the loop concept that we mentioned earlier. Now, when I mentioned the process of composting, we need to be really careful. It's not just a haphazard activity. It's a very thought through, controlled, biologically driven process. And there are parameters that we work within in terms of getting the right ratios of carbon to nitrogen, the right amount of moisture, so we have plenty of oxygen and air for the microbes to do all the decomposition work. So, I mean, that takes some good thought, but following that, we can be successful. Next slide. And humanure composting is really an age-old practice. It's a practice of many, many ancient civilizations, which served both the purpose of managing waste and also for disposal, as well as solving a problem of providing fertility for crops. The biggest concern that people have is making sure that we kill any pathogens that could be harmful to either us as humans or plants. The great news is there was some really excellent research done in the 1970s by USDA, Department of Ag, as well as the US Environmental Protection Agency, where they developed best management practices and came up with a regime that involves reaching high temperatures that effectively kill the pathogens. And I've performed some research and done some demonstration here in Vermont to show those really work. You know, we put in both plant pathogens and weed seeds and so forth. If you follow that, now that involves taking temperatures, you know, reaching those temperatures, turning piles. So it takes some effort. Now, the good news also is that the heat requirements, if we do that, helps us to be the most efficient. But we can also, and we were able to show it in our research, that you can get good pathogen kill even if you don't quite reach those temperatures. It just takes longer. So you're looking at a storage process. So that's where we were proposing, you know, being conservative in terms of that time, so we know we're operating in a safe environment. So the published guidelines and regulatory pathways will enable safe at-home composting. I mean, this is what we're proposing. Will enable safe at-home composting and support for the new practitioners.
Okay. Hi, I'm Tom Mosakowski. I'm going to present a couple slides about precedents where there are already existing examples that we can pull from. Just a little brief snippet about myself. I have a little bit of overlap with Chrissy as far as the motivation here of why I'm participating. I'm not a homesteader myself, but was an aspiring one for a while, and saw that there were some, you know, a big hole in my perspective in the Vermont rules and laws about accommodating such things as we are talking about in this webinar. And through finding other examples, like I'll talk about in the next slide in Maine, I tried to, have been trying to, through this bill, H.164, to have such accommodations here in Vermont. So starting out here, the World Health Organization has a document called Guidelines for the Safe Use of Wastewater, Excreta, and Gray Water. And in this volume number 4, they address the concerns of microbial hazards and using these, you know, human wastes for safely in agriculture, and to help preserve the safety of the consumers and workers and local communities. You can see in the table, it speaks a bit to what Deb already addressed about how these things can be, the safety concerns can be addressed and pathogens eliminated to baseline levels, either through high temperature or more ambient temperatures, but longer time, or an alkaline treatment. Yep, and I'll just also say that that's really good that they're considering that, because in small scale single household homesteading situations, or even not homesteading, but it's difficult to achieve, I think, as Deb said, the high temperature conditions, or it requires more strict practices. So a little closer to home, we have some precedents of practices that have been adopted that we would like to see here. Julia spoke a little bit to the Vermont State Parks adopting the new best management practices for their moldering toilets. And I think said that moldering toilets would most likely be very similar to what most homes have and would have. In Maine, they have they allow the compost toilet contents to be used as a soil amendment on site. There aren't very many requirements. They don't require NSF certified composting toilets. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And they do have options as well for low impact residential lifestyles. And by that, I mean that they have low water use, so no plumbed or powered water wells. And the compost toilet contents, I already spoke to, but the only other requirement is that there be a very small leach field. So no septic tank is required, and a drilled well isn't required either. So these accommodations contained in the main subsurface wastewater disposal rules were, as I already spoke to a bit, were the main precedent and example that motivated me to work with my local legislator to create H.164 to hopefully require the Vermont administrative rules to adopt similar regs. South of us in Massachusetts, the solid waste from compost toilets can be buried on site under 6 inches of soil. So that element is similar to the Vermont rules presently, but it differs in that soil testing is not required and the burial site need not meet the requirements for a leach field. So more flexibility there. And the location just need to be approved by one's local municipal board of health. And then across the country, adopted by Oregon, has been the IAPMOS, and we can all look that up. I need not spell out the acronym or word it out. Has the Uniform Plumbing Code that contains guidance for compost toilet solid management. And in that, the composting is required to have a 2-year retention period in a separate chamber and can be beneficially used on site. So this would apply to, the conventional modern residential situations with plumbing, but it is missing the more low impact or, off-grid simple living lifestyles as accommodated by Maine's rules, and what this, our eco-sanitation working group would also like to see as an extra element added to allowances in Vermont. I will hand it back to Chrissy for the next slide.
All right, thanks, Tom. So I'm going to talk about our goals of our work group that we created with the various folks that are on, that I forgot to mention in the beginning, include support and representation from the Composting Association of Vermont. We've got Clivis Multrum on board, and just a whole lot of folks that keep coming on. That's been really exciting. It's like a little thing that keeps growing. So our goals that we've created together, the first one is create a streamlined regulatory pathway for safe and supported humanure composting and subsequent soil integration. So what is a streamlined regulatory pathway? So when I think about it, I think about a pathway that doesn't require individualized advocating for special alternatives that may, or more likely may not, be approved depending on who is in charge of approving them. So there are innovative alternatives within the DEC, but as Julia stated, for them and for myself personally, I ran into a lot of, well, Julia didn't have a wall. They worked with them and created this great thing that's happening. That took a long time and a lot of money. And for me personally, I hit some walls, and I know a lot of other homesteaders who have hit a lot of walls. So we're hoping to create something that, working with the DEC, to show the science and to be able to compromise on something that is a pathway that would be more streamlined, definitely with, safety at, the very foremost, making sure everything's safe and supported, and people can get answers, and not be afraid to ask. So the second goal is to explore opportunities for reduced flow, eco-friendly septic solutions, which could include gray water recycling. So reduced flow systems will hopefully allow eco-minded homesteaders to forego overkill costly septic systems if they choose to design or use a gray water design that greatly limits water flow and or approves the old-fashioned method of hand carrying their potable water. And Vermont currently doesn't allow that. And that was really a huge barrier for me. And so that's what Tom was speaking about. In Maine, they have allowances, and even in New Hampshire, they do have allowances for not having plumbed water in. Then you don't have to have it plumbed out. So lots of folks would like to start out affordably, talk about affordable housing, to be able to start simple and, work up to these bigger systems if folks choose to. And the third one is to facilitate public education about ecological sanitation and safety and practice. So we will continue to educate the public and the regulators about composting as a best management practice in order to promote safe eco-sanitation practices and pathways informed by peer-reviewed science and case studies and experiences. So those are our goals. And next slide is the bills we have going right now. So this team put together H.163. So we've been working together for about 2 years. There's been different numbers for the bills in the past that have been similar. They haven't been adopted yet. So we're really hoping, and that's part of why we are hosting this webinar, is to just get the word out and educate folks about what these bills are and how to support them. H.163 really just establishes a legalized working group, to develop a pathway for compost toilet solids management in Vermont, and developing best management practices. So that's it, and it would include, people that are represented here on this team, master composter like myself, scientists like Deb, and the DEC as well. We would have wastewater representation from the DEC as part of that team. So really just, it would legalize a group to study more and, really encourage new pathways together as a team. So the bills have been introduced for the past 3 years, and Tom talked a little bit about 164 and what he was experiencing, and he worked with his rep to get that one started. So we really thank our representatives for supporting these bills. We had a lot of sponsors, and we're hoping to get more. So if everyone, what you can do is you can, talk to your representatives. You can call a member of the House Committee on Environment and Energy and voice your support. Tell your friends, talk about it, ask us questions. We're happy to help. And it seems to be like what we really want to do is kind of make it not a taboo topic. A lot of folks who are living this way are afraid to talk about it because they're concerned that they might get in trouble for their practices. So we want to make it safe. We want to make it supported. We want to talk about it, and we'd love your support. So thank you for coming. And I'm going to finally get back on here and look at the chat box, which I haven't been doing because I was so afraid I was going to accidentally make my notes go away by minimizing it. So Julia, have you been checking the chat? And we want to open it up for questions.
Yeah, seeing a lot of good messages from people in here. It looks like, people have a lot of experience with this. I saw someone asked if there were special allowances for if you have 10 acres or more. And I don't think there are any provisions regardless of your lot size or anything like that.
No, I would just say that because I have 50 acres, I was able to get a let's see, I still needed a septic system, but I was able to get a type of a septic that had a 2-year time of travel, was made it so that it was a little bit less of a I didn't need a mound system, which was nice, but there's really currently nothing for more acreage, but that's a good question.
And I'll share one more thing about, I think, the timeliness of these bills in particular is, I think the DEC is planning on working on a rule rewrite in a few years from now. So having legislation that kind of really gives them the directive to explore eco-san now, I think is key so that can be incorporated in their next kind of rule change.